All right, awesome. Then we'll wait for like slightly less than a minute. And if not, then we'll just go on with it. While we wait for Adya, just two things. The first one being is that I encourage all speakers to time themselves, since we won't be keeping track of the timestamps in the chat unless someone really wants us to. You can say that before your speech. And secondly, if you do have a preferred way of taking POIs, please do state that before your speech as well.
I got a response. We have to wait for 2 more minutes. If that's not the case, then Marta will join us on the panel.
Did Marta tell you that?
Yes.
Okay, well, if Marta said that, then we will wait for 2 minutes. Don, are you here to replace Adya on the panel?
I am. Hi.
Ah, okay, awesome. Good, great. Slay, we can start. PM, whenever.
Hey.
Okay. I assume you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take a PI in the chat. If I don't take one by 5:30, only after that point you can unmute. Okay. Starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 4 points of framing, then why we change people's cost calculus so that they stop on the average doing immoral actions, and then 3 claims on why we decrease criminality more than we've ever managed in history, why in general we make the world better by fixing other sorts of things that are borderline of crime or are just not nice things to do to people, and 3, why we give more people the capacity to become more moral agents and why that is a good thing in and of itself. What is the framing? First of all, what does criminalization mean? It means that there's a legal piece of legislation that says that having a bad moral record is something criminalizable. Against that piece of legislation, using this device, we decided that person has it or not. The extent to which we punish is similar to other crimes, so based on severity. Very minor things, maybe just put in a database, hey, you should be more careful. We can fine you. We can put you in sort of rehabs to become more moral, community work, and for the most extreme cases, jail and this sort of nature. 2, insofar as this device is completely accurate, when someone is reasonably suspected for some sort of crime, and considering all crimes are considered immoral to some extent, this device will probably show that. So when you have warrants or strong suspicions that someone is criminal, we'll always use in this sort of case the device. 3, in this debate, we're not talking about immoral thoughts, only moral actions, because the moral character of a person requires someone to be a moral agent. To be a moral agent, you have to attribute a person a certain action. You cannot attribute thought insofar as we're not in complete control of our thoughts. We're in complete control of action. We have to give the nervous stimuli to give actions. Fourth point of framing. What is this morality that the system will use? This will be utilitarianism for three reasons. One, other sorts of moralities presuppose another thing that is important, such as in deontology, you ought not kill. Utilitarianism is based on things that are universal. We all have an aversion to pain. We all somewhat have an aversion for pleasure, and we all want this. Two, it factors in the perspectives of all people insofar as pain and pleasure are things that are felt the same by some people, but other external things are based on the external world we've been born in and how we value that before, and they're not unique to our neurophysical wiring, which is relatively the same for all of us. But three, so far as this device is accurate and probably measures, we need a metric that is measurable, that it is the utility on which utilitarianism is built. The conclusion of this that can't say that, for example, in conservative countries, you will consider being LGBTQ immoral and punish this, because they need to show it is utilitarian. It's unclear if it creates people pain at the point where they don't care about this when they're conservative, and creates tremendous amounts of pleasures to anyone who can actually satisfy their sexual identity. But to even if it's not liked in one country, overall in the whole spectrum of utilitarianism considered broadly, you probably don't think that that's bad. What is the first thing I'm going to prove? The first thing that I'm going to prove absent this framing is that we change the calculus of individual people to not do immoral actions. Three reasons for that. Crime is considered bad. It decreases your chances to be employed. It appears people have an aversion, don't want to interact with the criminal, or just think of you less, even if you get fined, etc. For this reason, you want to avoid it, and you probably try to be as moral and only do small, minor things which don't really get big of a punishment, as per my framing. Two, oftentimes you rationalize to yourself that you have a good reason for doing something wrong. For example, I steal because I do not have money. Oftentimes this is absent to talking to someone else to break your framing. What we do with this motion is, one, we make sure people within their cost calculation think what others perceive of themselves and of the harms they create, because the end point of if they're caught is, other people finding out. But two, the thing in of itself, the device acts as an intervention for them to factor in being caught. Three, oftentimes people do immoral actions because they believe they don't caught. The shit off like civil servants in Eastern Europe take bribes knowing that they don't get caught. Insofar as these things are always morally wrong, you probably catch them in the large majority of cases. Practical impacts. The first one, I think we catch way more criminals or people doing criminal actions. Oftentimes there's not enough physical evidence to catch them. Oftentimes higher up criminals who do the most amount of crime, who have the most information, who's catching deters most the organization because they're crucial for that running, outsource that, or bribe people who are investigating them, or put themselves behind many layers of reasonable doubt so that finding them is really hard. At the point where we catch more of these, because we only need to have a suspicion to put them in the machine and then they do crime, so it's always wrong, we catch them. But two, insofar as they know they're caught more often, and the chance of being caught is 100% if there's a suspicion, people are less likely to opt into the higher positions of criminality, or criminality knowing in the first place, because they know it never pays, because you always get fucking caught, because crime oftentimes and in many cases is immoral. But the other positive impact of it is probably you need less officers to catch them, less people to deter, less surveillance. And insofar as people have an intrinsic right to their privacy, because it's the actions they do to have a place in the world, we give people more privacy because you don't need to surveil everyone every time. We have this device when people get caught and there's reasonable suspicion, you don't need to deter. But two, there's less potential for cops to be assholes and to have weapons, to be a militarized police, because there's no longer a need to have strong forces on our side to deter and do these sort of things, because the catching is much more likely. Second important impact, there are a lot of morally bad actions that are quite ambiguous. For example, being shitty humans, cheating on people, like tremendous amount of pain on someone. They can't ever enjoy a good relationship, etc. But also like very shitty working conditions, a lot of the things corporations do, which aren't exactly legislated. Look, McDonald's workers are nice with, but in pretty bad conditions, creating the working conditions are extremely bad. For example, Wall Street people gambling away people's lives because there isn't existing legislation that makes it illegal, but it's still huge harms when hundreds of grandmas lose the money they have. Before that, POI.
Clarification. Do people know whether they're doing things immoral? Is it a publicly accessible record?
I mean, presumably you have for the things that are worse. People can request it privately for themselves, just like Not anyone can request your criminal record, but you can request your own criminal record. There can be resources to make you more moral, because this is a new thing we're introducing. We're happy to stand behind these sort of things. One, the impact is that we remove a lot of harms of this activity and we punish people who do a lot of crimes. These crimes don't get punished in status quo for three reasons. One, of the tank corporation, these people have power to lobby, to bankroll parties in the legislation to make that action criminal doesn't exist. By the point where the bad moral intent of an action by a corporation is something that is immoral, it's already banned by the motion, so we circumvent all the resources to fight, conservative parties and lobbying. But finally, oftentimes it's unclear how we tie the harm, and people in mega corporations exploit this for their conditions, or they work in lacunas, like all the people in the financial sector in the 80s, working especially with asset types that weren't already legislated, knowing that there's no legal chance to call, but fully unknowing they're doing something bad, taking someone money's away and doing other immoral actions. Moral actions are pretty bad. We don't have them on our side of that.
All right, great. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for their speech. I would now like to invite the Leader of Opposition to deliver their speech. Hear, hear.
Hi, sorry, give me a second to set my timer. Before I move on to two arguments in this debate, I would just like to bring up a few key pieces of framing in this debate. The first thing is that this debate is not about crimes like murder or theft, because note that these crimes are already things that are already criminalized in status quo. This debate is about actions which are immoral and not criminalized in status quo previously, probably for reasons that it's very hard to gauge things like ill intentions, or it's probably very hard to observe things like lying or any other immoral actions. These are the reasons why it's not criminalized and why government side has to propose that they want to be criminalized, right? We say OG already loses out this debate from the get-go, and so far as a majority of the things that they try to say in this debate are things that are already criminalized, such as murder and theft. These are things that we already prosecute through the criminal justice system and that we can already hold accountable for. The second thing here is I want to note that this House motion, therefore we cannot reimagine a world to base on what is like a new world, right? We have to necessarily base this motion on what has already happened in status quo and what status quo already looks like. We say status quo is a world currently where you have things which like structurally disenfranchised minorities, or probably system which goes against like a just only favors a few over the others, right? This is how the current status quo right now, and we tell you why the system implemented in this status quo is one that is bad for the majority. The third thing then is to characterize how morality is like, and this is something that I think is lacking out in the opening government speech, right? We say the problem with morality then is morality is something that's incredibly subjective, right? Morality is one that changes according to the context and the people, right? According to the time frame, right? Probably a few years ago, it was immoral for women to take up jobs, but it's now moral because this is something that is now accepted in society. The same also applies that probably LGBT movement is deemed as moral within developed countries, but is deemed as immoral within developing countries, right? This is something that's incredibly subjective and has to vary according to the society itself, which determines it based on things like religion or even cultural values that will pass down from generations, right? Moving on to the arguments in this debate, I have two main arguments. Firstly, on how immoral acts are a necessary mechanism of self-preservation in status quo, and secondly, in terms of why it's just principally wrong to judge people based on their intentions and emotions. Firstly, on why immoral acts are necessary like mechanism for self-preservation, right? This is true because we say a lot of actions that are deemed immoral and are implicit, and it's something that it's not perceived, cannot be perceived viscerally, such as things like lying or just not being empathetic as a whole, is something which disenfranchised individuals rely on to be able to sustain and survive within the society we live in today. This is true because this looks like disenfranchised individuals in like developing countries having to lie upon the fact that they're straight in order to be able to sustain themselves and to not be like ostracized by the community or even be criminalized to begin with, right? This also looks like an individual person within society today who has to lie to their bosses, telling that, I have certain degrees or I have certain experiences in certain jobs to be able to necessarily get a job in an incredibly hyper-competitive society. This also looks like governments having to lie to necessarily protect the interests of the country and to not cause outrage or chaos, right? Having to lie that probably like the economic recession isn't that bad, so stocks won't drop and people won't lose their money and the stock market as a whole. We say these are things which are incredibly important. To further that, we also think like immoral actions that are deemed immoral by society, also actions probably like just being empathetic as a whole. We say these are things which goes against the very interests of disenfranchised individuals who have to necessarily not be selfish and to not care for the majority because it's the only way they can survive in a system that is structurally against them, that doesn't provide any sort of job opportunities towards them, right? We say the only way they can survive is by being not being empathetic and being selfish, so that you don't donate all your money towards people that you want to help because you cannot afford to do so, and because you have like bread and butter is probably more important than any other individuals out there. We see these are the individuals that will be deemed immoral by society that are criminalized on sort of government insofar as you let the system go, right? The second argument then is about how we shouldn't, it's basically wrong to then judge people based on your intentions and emotions, right? Given the framing that is set up, the acts that are like certain acts are already criminalized in status quo, therefore that shouldn't be the motions to begin with. We say that what this policy necessarily does is that now we hold people that previously have ill intentions accountable, right? This is true because this was previously things that cannot be measured and observed, but cannot be measured because of the policy proposed by government today, right? This looks like ill intentions, probably like maybe I should steal something from a bread shop, or probably I have to kill this individual in order for me to get a job promotion. These are the ill intentions that a lot of individuals have, but they don't necessarily act on because at the end of the day, they don't think this is something that's worth it. What does set of government war looks like? Set of government war is a war which persecutes individuals for having these ill intentions, right? It persecutes them for like literally thinking about wanting to steal from a job because you can no longer afford food. We say this is incredibly problematic, right? Because look, there are a lot of immoral intentions or things that are deemed immoral by society are things that only disenfranchised individuals can feel, right? Because they're really structurally disenfranchised from the system, which means the natural reaction towards them is anger, is hatred, things towards the system, right? The same doesn't affect the privileged individuals because when this system is implemented by status quo, they're probably the only group of individuals that can afford to control their emotions, to control their intentions, to not think about things like wanting to harm other individuals or to think about things like wanting to steal from a job because there's no necessity for them to do so to begin with, right? This is a system that only affects the most vulnerable individuals because it's a natural reaction towards necessary reaction towards the system that they react towards. We think government war is a war that's incredibly problematic because we persecute these individuals for something that was never their fault to begin with. This is principally wrong from the core because it wasn't their fault that they were born into this sort of scenario. It wasn't their fault that they were born into a system that is structurally against them. We say that on your side of the house, these individuals are then left out, are then criminalized for something that they didn't do wrong to begin with, right? What have I brought to you in this debate? I brought to you two things. A, I told you why this is immoral actions is necessary for self-preservation and preservation and status quo. Why is it necessary for you to lie? Why is it necessary for you to be selfish and not empathetic? And secondly, I told you why this is what a system that necessarily goes against the most vulnerable communities within status quo that have ill intentions, that naturally reacts towards the injustice in the system because of this not being powder to oppose. Thank you.
Great. I'd like to thank the Leader of Opposition for their speech. I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to deliver their speech. Here.
Am I audible?
You are.
Awesome. One second. I think every crime society or person in society commits is most likely considered immoral because society and the government has given a standard of morality, and they believed as like a conception and like cohesively decided that that is bad and he should be punished. So I think insofar as society considers all crimes to be immoral, I'm unclear as to why crimes don't also apply in this record. That is where Stefan's first part of Stefan's argument comes into play, which I'll go on to weigh with crime prevention and like finding people like rapists and people who are abusers who never get caught in the first place out in our scenario. Few things in direct response with regards to O's case then. The first thing I want to directly respond to is with this second idea about how like people's thoughts and people's like intentions are going to be policed. One, they uniquely ignore Stefan's framing as to why we aren't going to be policing thoughts in the first place. Two reasons why thoughts aren't really utilitarian. One, I don't think most thoughts we have as people, either regardless of them being good or like good or bad, we have any control over them, right? Because they're very subconscious. Like me, like being like hateful to like my friend or like wanting to punch them is a very subconscious thing because as a reaction to something they have done, right? Like I don't intentionally try to like be a shitty person or intentionally try to hate on someone, right? So it's a very subconscious thing I have no control over. But two, and more importantly, my action or my thought has a utilitarian outcome when I carry out that action, right? So for example, if I think about punching Stefan, that has no utilitarian positive or negative, right? Because nothing in this world has changed because of me having that thought. The only thing that changes is if I act on that thought and go and punch him, because that like is like utilitarianly bad for him because he gets hurt and like he's sad and all that jazz, right? That means that the action is what creates a utilitarian outcome in this world. So thought has no outcome or no tangible change in society. So I'm unclear as to why it's like thoughts and intentions are really part of this motion. The second thing I want to directly engage with then is these ideas about like people's intentions, right? Lying about jobs and lying about your identity, right? Again, this signals Stefan's framing as to what utilitarianism means. So presumably, if I lie to the police with regards to my identity as a gender minority, I have positive utility. The reason for this is very simple, right? The negative utility to society comes when I go into jail and I suffer and I get tortured and I get like constantly oppressed, right? So that is negative utility and no one gets any happiness out of it. But like I have a lot of sadness out of it, right? So then when I lie to them, there is positive utility into society, right? Because I protect my identity, I protect from being tortured and like being excluded and all of the violence coming to you, right? So the metric we will set out to this debate based on what morality is a utilitarian metric, right? So like insofar as you don't prove to us as to why lying to save yourself or lying to save your identity is utilitarianistically negative, I'm unclear as to why these are bad things in the first place, right? So this encapsulates all the examples they talk about. I'll take CO at around 5:30. So like this includes things about lying about your identity or like lying about a job or all that. So it encapsulates in that like moral metric, right? The final thing with regards to this is that like the idea about like poor people being empathetic, right? I don't think that there's like a positive or negative like utilitarian like metric with regards to not being empathetic, right? Because there's no change or like no like thought process behind it. So like I'm unclear as to how this materializes in an action, right? So like not doing something is not something negative, right? So like me as a poor person not donating has no change in society as I pointed out in before, right? So I'm unclear as to what exactly like what moral metric they're basing this on to say that our device is going to actually be applied in our scenario, right? The final thing is with regards to subjectivity, right? Like moral metrics are incredibly subjective and hence we shouldn't like put people on it. Like I think it's fine if morality is subjective and if we have the ability to have a moral metric which is object towards all, right? This is where I engage with like CEO's question about whether POI, whether people know this or not. Like I think this can like act as any other like medical record or any like bank statement that applies in status quo, right? Like you get a record every month, you did these things, you were morally negative or positive, and hence like okay, if you were like and you can have like a tipping point, right? If you're more than this, you pay this tax, or if you're more than this, you have proportionally harmful thing, right? So you as a person can have that record, so you can know when to police your actions, right? Like this happens in a metric that is objective to everyone, right? Because now when you carry out this motion, everyone uses the data they get based on the actions they have to create a moral metric, right? So the comparative is they can't say morality is subjective, because that subjective morality or the world opposition defense is changing on our comparative when you have this motion carried out and when we have this device, right? Because like when you disseminate information about what good and like wrong things are, which are like subjective things like cheating on someone or whatever, you change this moral metric and make it objective. Let's go to Stefan's case before that CEO.
Would you murder a murderer to save 10 people?
Like you're asking me questions I don't know. Like you need to give me a reason as to why that is morally good or bad, right? Like I don't know what I would do. like maybe someone would do it differently. If you prove why it is utilitarian, negative, or positive, sure, why not? So I think two things Stefan uniquely gives you, right? The first thing, which is I think is most important, is about crimes that are not caught right now, and about the reason as to why most people do crimes in the first place is because they have a feeling that they won't get caught, right? I think the biggest example for this is like women who get harmed by men who are like either predators or like close friends, like abusers or like rapists or whatever, right? Because like the social structure and the legal system is against women, right? Because like the bar to like having successful trials about like hearsay, things like this means it's incredibly hard to actually prosecute these people. So a lot of abusive men get away with their crimes because there's no mechanism to assure whether they've done it in the first place. That completely changes on our comparative, right? Because you have a moral record of what the fuck they've done. So if you've been an abusive person, you will like have a skyrocketing of moral like badness, right? Like because you like literally like taken away someone's identity and like how that's incredibly harmful, right? So what then changes is that it is when you see these people being prosecuted more and more, when you see these people being caught in the first place, you don't want to do it in the first place, right? Because your defense mechanism of I can do this and get away with it changes. Scale, I think this is the biggest impact, right? Literally more like, and we don't have to prove why every single abuser stops. I think on scale and likelihood, most abusers who do this because they feel like they won't get caught and they can get away with it, stop doing it when this changes. The second thing I want to note is with regards to how this prevents which are morally ambiguous areas which are incredibly harmful for people. The biggest example I have for this is cheating on people, right? It's very morally ambiguous, it's not illegal. But the reality is when you are cheated on, it is incredibly harmful for you as a person, right? Your whole identity you start questioning. You start questioning your value as a person, whether you will be good enough for another person. You like start like going and doing things like plastic surgery or whatever, like questioning your own body identity, right? All of this is prevented on our side. Then cheating is incredibly a morally harmful thing because you like destroy another person's identity and their value, right? All of those things are prevented. All the harms that happen from those are prevented as well. The final thing I wanted to be is this idea that in some cases people don't understand the things they're doing are morally wrong insofar as they don't have an external metric to like weigh it on, right? When you go and be a shitty person to your girlfriend, when you're a shitty person to your children or your parents, you have a tax on you, you have a fine on you, you have an external source saying the things you're doing are bad. That is when you only like question your own morality. That is when you're likely to become a good person and change. We're just going to get more good people on our side. We're going to prevent most of the crimes happening in governments.
All right, great. I would like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for their speech. I would like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to deliver their speech. Here.
Yes, I'll take up your item closing before we in chat. For starting my speech, I have one main question. If slavery brings utility towards society, is that moral or is that now immoral? OG is already out of this debate because of their own framing. I have a couple of things that I want to clarify at the top of this speech. Firstly, I want to say that moral is not based on circumstances. It cannot be on in this circumstance, maybe it brings some benefits, therefore it's moral or not. It has to be set rules by society of what you should and should not do, or it goes against the principles of the criminal justice system if you cannot have a set standards for people to understand what they even need to do in so many diverse circumstances. Secondly, that I want to talk about slavery, abusing workers, raping someone while they are asleep are things that can bring a lot of utility towards society based on the utilitarian metric, because they do bring positive outcomes towards society. This loses them the debate because insofar as they mention utilitarianism as a metric, it forces, even if they do successfully force people to be moral, it uniquely benefits the rich. Because this means that corporations are able to sacrifice the most vulnerable individuals in order to achieve so-called most vulnerable are the ones who are going to suffer under the metric of utilitarianism. Because what you want then is to have a good outcome towards society in general. This is why OG is already out. But let's go problem. Second reason as to why OG is also out is because they have a problem-solution mismatch. Their case is based on why you want to catch criminals. But there are a couple of reasons why we can do that as well. Firstly, the criminal justice system do exist. We think we're able to have that. If your problem is not being able to get a lot of evidence, we think what we're able to do is have better investigative journalism and have better methods of having DNA being investigated and so on. Even if you don't buy that panel, we think that secondly, you can use this moral metric as a form of investigating. Because what they're trying to say is that insofar as you are immoral, this means that we can catch in jail because sometimes you don't have sufficient evidence. We can use the same method of using this morality metric to find out who is likely to be bad or not without immediately putting them in jail. Because being immoral doesn't immediately mean that you're a murderer. We can use that to easily find a murderer and then use the evidence using what they're doing right now. The reason as to why this is important is because oftentimes we just have to agree with the innocent before proven guilty metric. Being shitty all the time doesn't mean that you're a murderer. You cannot put them in jail just for that. We think that that's something that's unjust in and of itself. It's the problem-solution mismatch. Thirdly, then, we can have better legislation. In the last motion, we've talked about social movements being able to succeed in this. The reason as to why putting people in jail is something that's less likely to happen on their side and putting actual criminals in jail is less likely is because oftentimes then, if you have some fines, let's say some punishments for people who are immoral, these are oftentimes less severe than life imprisonment and things like that. If you're already giving them a punishment, this means that the societal push to have further punishments is then less, because it seems as if it gives the kind of feeling that we're already regulating people who are immoral. This itself is really, really bad for society, and it's the recipe for failure, because oftentimes we have to acknowledge that we have to actually find the criminals themselves. You cannot just feel like something is already being done. For these reasons, then OJ is out. But we want to weigh this against necessity, because I don't think OJ responded to this. We think that nothing is important when we talk about necessities. Necessity and the vulnerable individuals are the most important individuals in society that we have to talk about. Oftentimes, these individuals do not have a choice. Just like you don't have a choice of what you think, you cannot control your thoughts. Therefore, it cannot be a crime. Oftentimes, then, it is a necessity to lie in order to protect yourself. This is then the most important thing here, because these are the most disenfranchised people within society. Insofar as we're able to prove that this measure protects them, we also then preemptively weigh against CG. Quickly then, I want to have a quick preemption in case CG says, why then you're able to have individuals work and why you're able then to have individuals commit to morality, and how somehow this might help somehow the poor people. I want to say why then it's unlikely to be able to regulate the actions of individuals. Because oftentimes then, these rich individuals are exactly the ones who are willing to pay the fines. The rich people don't have to be the ones doing these bad things. Corporations can have one worker to do these bad things, and that worker is the person that has to pay fines. It takes some time to accumulate a consistency of immorality. Therefore, the fines are easily payable. Even if it's not easily payable, these corporations can always get a good lawyer and fight in court. This is why then it is always more worth it to have the profit margin compared to paying such a small fine of what you would do on side of proposition. This is why then oftentimes it is unlikely to succeed. Even if, let's say, that's not true, Hannah, you have to note that oftentimes being immoral will not get you regardless. Morality is the exact metric of what corporations are likely to look for, because they don't want someone who is scared to go to jail for immorality. They want someone who is willing to commit immorality for them to have a better profit margin. This is why they uniquely benefit these individuals. Lastly, then, I want to go into an extension to talk about why immorality is not a crime. Firstly, what constitutes a crime? It's not a crime because it is not objectively harmful. We say that being immoral is also not objectively harmful all the time. Crimes have to be consistent. It has to be something that has an objective standard throughout, whereas morality is not. Therefore, then it is something that's unjust and against the criminal justice system if we deem this as something that is crime. But more importantly, that I want to say that states cannot intervene in the private lives of individuals. We have the right to exercise our own free wills. We have the right to do what we want, insofar it doesn't bring that much harmful benefits as what the law would criminalize on their side of the house. The state already has a lot of power. We think it is then something that's really bad if the state exerts even more power and make us into puppets that's controlled by the state 24/7. We think that human liberty and self-determination is the prerequisite to any form of self-actualization, this form of democracy. This is the form of any laws in society. The self-determination and the well-being of these individuals. Therefore, any practical argument that is
aim to preserving the meaning to be alive and the point of human civilization has to be less important than this argument, because this is analytically prior to any form of human meaning of being alive. If all of your actions is being controlled by the state, we don't think there's meaning, we think there's unjust. So
All right, great. I would like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for their speech. I would like to invite the Member of Government to deliver their speech. Hear, hear.
Hello, just a second. Am I audible and visible?
You are.
Ivan Karamazov said, God is dead, everything is allowed. We don't want to ever live in a world like this. We want to fix this problem. We want people to be punished and to suffer for committing abuse, emotional, for being scumbags to other people. What our extension is going to be is very simple. We say people who are suffering from emotional abuse deserve reparation, and this is the only way to address the huge injustice that is bestowed upon them, and the only way for them to achieve justice and some sort of meaning in their lives. Before I get into our main extension, I want to, engage with top care. Every time it's a motion like this, every time one team says, poor people, they are immoral, and every time they don't analyze why. First response to opening opposition. Number one, it clearly says in the motion, this is consistent immoral behavior. This means that even if you're sometimes selfish, even if you sometimes lie on a CV, this is not what the motion is about, right? This means that you constantly are being a scumbag. You're constantly taking advantage of people. You're constantly lying to a huge array of people. Sometimes lying to your boss. It does not qualify as being constantly immoral behavior, which would be in this, right? So on the count of the motion, they don't stand. But secondly, they are yet to prove why poorer people are, more immoral. They say you need to do some bad things, such as lie to your boss. Sure, but most others, maybe, I don't even know, do you really have to do that, right? Majority of people actually lie to their boss and lie to a lot of people, right? It doesn't have to be that you're being a scumbag. We deny this characterization on the grounds of integrity. On OG, what we'll say and how will we differentiate and beat them, we're going to say that, irregardless of any practical outcome, right? We say this is justified as a reparation, right? Because even if we don't change the practical impacts they want, even if we don't capture criminals or whatever they're saying, we still think this is a morally justifiable thing to do to actually help people who are really suffering, and this is the only way to address them. So our main claim is this is reparation for people who suffer from constant abuse. What does this actually mean? What are these immoral people doing to them? Number one, it's oftentimes lying to them, deceiving them about the various mundane things. Where were they? What were they doing? Such as in relationships, right? Sometimes actively, cheating on them. Secondly, it's cheating on your, your significant other, being a scumbag towards them. Thirdly, it's emotionally manipulating someone, right? Telling them, if you love me, you will do this, right? If you don't behave in a certain way, I don't really like you anymore, and stuff like that. Constantly, this, right? Fourthly, it's constantly belittling them, saying they're less, they're not worth their much, and stuff like that. But how do they actually do this? Number one, they oftentimes use insecurities of the people they know, right? Oftentimes, these are really personal relationship between mother and son, between best friends, between people in a relationship. They know their insecurities and they use them to their advantage. Secondly, they make you feel guilty. They make you feel they're not being appreciated enough, right? If you don't do this, if you don't ditch your friends to hang out with me, you don't love me that much, right? You don't love me that much, right? Thirdly, it's criticizing something that they are self-conscious about, right? And that is also a way that they use to actually manipulate someone, right? How do you say, when you're trying to convince what career path to take in a relationship, your significant other can say, but you're not really good at it anyway. Why would you choose this? Why would you follow your dreams and use your, how do you say, manipulating you into doing a decision that is only beneficial to you, right? Fourthly, it's embarrassing you in front of other people just for the sake of it, to make them feel powerful, to make them feel more in control of you. These are things that people do, right? And this is extremely problematic, right? This ruins people's lives. But how does this emotionally destroy people's life, right? They can say, someone criticizes you, but this is so much more of that, right? This is someone who has influence over you, your parent, your girlfriend, your best friend, right? This could be someone who knows you, knows how to use your insecurities, right? But also you trust them to an extent. They have some sort of influence over you. What does this do? What does this further mean? This means that this is how you create your identity now. This is how you build your identity around yourself, because people who are closer to you are telling you what you are and what you are worth. You internalize this narrative. You believe, yes, that is actually what I am. Someone slowly, and it is becoming damaging to you. This leads to two impacts that destroy your lives. Number one, every other relationship or thing you do in your future life, you see to the prism of your insecurities that are bestowed upon you by your abuser. And this is problematic, right? Because everything you do following, you see to your insecurity. You always think about, they are going to, how to say, criticize me. I'm not worth that much. I shouldn't be doing this. But secondly, sometimes you can often relive trauma that someone did to you. Someone punched you or something like that. This is problematic, right? This is you being locked in a cage. That person has the key, and instead of giving you that key, they eat it. They can never let you escape from that prison, and you are in darkness, right? And this is not something to joke about. This is extremely problematic. And words oftentimes cut deeper than swords, right? And this is why we must forbid this, and we must give some sort of reparation towards these people. Before I continue, I'll take opening.
Emotional abuse is something that is already criminalized in society, and the reason why is because it's something that can be perceived, that can be observed. We know that you're emotionally distressed. You can see it.
Yeah, exactly. You cannot see it, right? That's the problem. There is no other way to fix this, right? Number one, it's oftentimes your friends or your family who are doing this, meaning that you don't really have other people to, how to say thank you. Secondly, you become emotionally dependent on them, right? You don't think, you're afraid to talk about this. You're afraid to talk about your insecurities because you think they are true. They made you that way for you. You can never speak out about this. Fourthly, you cannot prove this. You cannot say, how do you say, this is something that is visible. This is extremely not visible. This happens behind locked doors in your house. You can never have proof of this when someone gives you an offhand comment, right? To someone third party, that offhand comment might seem like nothing, but to you, when you repeat all the stories they have told you before and before, you can never actually talk to someone about them, and no one can actually know what you are going through, right? And this is precisely because of this, you can never actually, how do you say, escape. You can never actually find a different solution to this, and this is why we need this, how do you say, motion to actually close the gap that the justice system lacks, and that is to actually punish these things. Thank you.
All right, great. I would like to thank the member of government for their speech. I would like to invite the member of opposition to deliver their speech. Here.
Hi, am I clearly audible?
You are.
Great. Shout out to the Greek community. We're doing our best. Thanks everyone for helping us be here. You know who you are. Great. I'm gonna start my speech. Opening opposition runs two things. One, why do you have, they have an analysis about why humanity and human nature is inherent and making mistakes. No shit, Sherlock, you do a good decent job on analyzing that. But second of all, they say why self-actualization is good and why you have a freedom of choice. Also good decent case. I think opening up is winning opening up, right? But I think the freedom of choice is kind of contingent on actually proving why even in the status quo they have a positive case, you have this kind of maximization of choice and you don't have any kind of coerciveness when it comes to you choosing, right? Our stance is simple. We don't have a positive case. We have an inherent negative case on why the utilitarian metric opening government has established is severely harmful when it comes to disproportionality of punishment and how this plays out to society. pretty standardized case. Let's go and like nail down open government from outside the house. One, they mentioned something about like you've been able to look carefully where criminals exist because you have a track of the record, right? One, guys, come on. You cannot have a Fiat to monitor every action of every individual human. This is not like the Big Brother, right? You can have maybe a track record about the immorality, but you cannot have the nuanced like details when it comes to what is exactly that they're doing. This is an insane Fiat, and they haven't even analyzed why it is legitimate to have the Fiat to know every step of the action that they're actually doing, like every like dark alley corner to be able to understand what is the actions that they're making. More likely, in order to have a balanced debate, you should be able to defend why the moral track record is able to rationalize like the tipping point when it comes to like adding 1 or 2 or 3 points on immorality and so on. Let's see though why, even if that's the case and what they say is true, why is there still marginal? One, I think most of the times when it comes to like deterring crime, you're already ready to look on exactly because they have the burden of proving why you're consistently on the negative, because the motion says consistently. This means that you're someone that's perpetuating this kind of immoral behavior, that is to say criminal behavior. Therefore, you're like more on the spotlight. You are network. You like police and like government already knows where to look on, and you are established authority. But two, notice this is I think smart, right? If they say that small ambiguous acts have a smaller delta when it comes to your immorality, but then quantitatively you spam a lot of these actions, this means that like if you add up all like the small things that you do, they add quantitatively in the same amount of quality of numbering on metric when it comes to immorality, right? So it is entirely hard and unclear if you can identify who is the one that's doing all the small acts for like the one big act. But then three, I think the proportionality becomes way worse on their side of the house, right? Because if you're going to get bribed once for a court, you get double punished for their side of the house. You get punished for the act of get bribed, but then you get punished for being immorally getting bribed. Like and at the same time, it is disproportional, because if I'm lying for like 5 years to my spouse about something that I'm afraid of or something like that, this means that I'm equally like punished when it comes to you getting bribed and me like lying for 5 years in a row, which is fucking insane burden for opening government, and they haven't analyzed why this kind of utilitarian metric stands, right? Let's see why. Also, I'm going to engage in the great rebuttal. CG will be more on Panagis, but I think like reparations does not work because they have to prove why you get solace through punishment, and why if like my abusive teacher was in jail right now, if they were fined $1 million, why would solve my childhood trauma, right? I think that's also a big burden for CG. One, why disproportionality of punishment is important in this debate. We think utility is a really fucking bad metric to judge this debate. Why? One, you don't have epistemic access to quantify utilitarianism, right? You simply cannot. If you're not like a woke team pullet that can actually quantify and have the analysis of what is utilitarian for the future, like for short term and long term, like you think that you save like a grandma in the street because you think that you're saving a living soul, but then this grandma end up abusing 10 or 15 kids. You cannot actually have epistemic access of what this grandma is doing. Therefore, you cannot quantify this kind of utilitarian metric. Notice, open government and closing government are contingent on the model or like on the fiat utilitarianism, right? This means that exactly because you don't have the capacity to rationalize future actions, you're going to be condemned with an immoral record just because you couldn't calculate correctly. Two, notice intent does not matter. Open government says if you have an intent to be utilitarian, you should be rewarded. But if I actually like innovate an NGO in order to save the environment, and then this NGO fucks up and gets bribed or whatever and ends up polluting the environment, my intent would be to save to help out the utilitarian metric of open government. But then my execution was bad, and then I'm getting punished for my execution, not my intent. This is also insane, right? Because it is inherent that you're going to make miscalculations in the way that you're trying to help out humanity, right? I think this is immense harm on opening government. Let's see, like tangibly speaking, how this looks like. Before I go on, I'm really curious, OG.
For something to be in your moral record, you have to physically do that, knowing that was the intent. If something is beyond your proximate control, it's not within your moral record. It's probably other
guys. You had your chance to model the debate, one, but two, the more you restrict the when you punish someone, the more you lose actually proportionality of punishment and deterrence for punishment. Also, self-policing is really fucking vague of the mechanism why it's changing. If I'm self-policing and I know I'm immoral, probably I know I'm immoral and I won't stop self-policing because just a paper shows, right? How this looks like on their side of the house. One, I think social exclusion stigma is immense, right? Imagine going for an interview and then the boss that is actually that they want you to get hired is asking you of your track record, right? Two, like you're getting in relationships. People are going to be curious about like your track record, right? Because because you're gonna have like this kind of privacy access to it. So they're gonna compel you to show them the track record to see if they can trust them or not. 3, people are gonna fucking trip out if you're actually worthy of trusting, right? But like on the flip basis, you may be blindsided by someone that has a good, consistent moral record, then like completely fucks you over exactly because you have blind trust to them just because per framing of open government. But then 4, I think guilt is insanely foresight proposition. You guilt yourself and you self-punish yourself exactly because you couldn't calculate correctly and you did this one traumatizing mistake that made your like record go insane, and now everybody's risk averse. 5, like you're gonna distance yourself from bad actors and there is no second chances. Rehabilitation becomes way worse in the central house exactly because you are condemned and you have the bias that someone has a bad record, will never be a good person, and so you distance yourself in order to not be complicit, and you as well have a bad record, which is insane because then you distance from other people just because of a number, right? And you cannot rationalize the number if they actually were in fault. Why all of this is way worse? More people are going to get in jail. Rehabilitation does not improve inside proposition. They say, we have now this as a fiat. No, bullshit. You have to explain why rehabilitation works. Government works as a monopoly of violence, and then this kind of like monopoly of violence gets significantly worse exactly because you have a punitive God that punishes you every step of the way for not being able to utilitarianly understand your actions and your consequences, right? But 3, notice, if people are going to be risk averse, it's not only like saying you cannot self-actualize in a really nice wording, but it's about actually losing control of your life and not being able to sustain yourself and making critical decisions. This looks like more PC people and not being able to come out and not be able to discuss furtherly, explain what they say, what they want to say, and stick to themselves. For all of the above reasons, and because we believe in like agency and not punishment, proud to oppose.
All right, great. I'd like to thank the member of opposition for their speech, and I'd like to invite the government whip to deliver their speech. Hear.
Just a second. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, first of all, a little bit of meta. I don't believe that we have to follow the OG's metric that this has to be utilitarian, because although this is a prop motion, because the motion itself presumes that there is some way to accurately measure this, I don't think it is up to a government to have a way to measure, but that there is thinking that it's already determined what the just going on. Okay, what the OOs tell us? Okay, they tell us that sometimes you have to do this and you have to cheat, and it's extremely bad. First of all, I think that that's not the case. Most of the people who are poor in a bad condition do not cheat, do not lie, and do not do bad things. I think it's insulting for all of those people who are living normal lives and not lying to everyone and not doing anything to just justify everyone else saying, they had to do this. But secondly, notice that even if you, as my partner told you, do it sometimes, you don't have to do it always. This is not a consistently bad record. But thirdly, notice why it's extremely actually moral. Even if you are disadvantaged by some other parties cheating, you are still immoral to others who are in the same position but are not cheating. Just because someone else is cheating, you do not have the right to cheat on your own when there are others who are not cheating. Okay, so at the end of the day, it's not moral, and we think it's justified to get punished for this. Notice that the punishment for this is not 10 years in prison. It's just you lied, so you probably get some fine or something like that. But also they say, it's your liberty, your self-actualization. We don't believe that part of your liberty and freedom is to lie and to do all of those things. This is not a liberty, because at this time you are attacking others' liberty. You are attacking others' lives, and you have no right to do this. That is where we see that is where they see the line. Moving on to a CO. Okay, so what does the CO tell us? First of all, I think that double punishment is not likely to happen, because at the point where you're punishing people through this system for, let's say, robbery, it's really likely that people see it's a double punishment, so they're going to either lower the punishment of the robbery or completely eliminate it, because people just see it and they don't want to have double punishment. So I think it's likely that it's going to change the society, that you don't get double punished for something like this. Second of all, they're talking about prison times, and though prison times is bad, I think that it's likely when you're constantly getting this feedback and you're constantly being from the starting point getting that you're punished for behaving badly, it's much more likely that people are going to stop behaving badly, that people are going to less likely to commit crimes and do all sorts of things and behave better, which means that they're less likely to end up in prison, not more likely. Also, they're talking about stigma and how now people are seeing on your record that you did bad things. First of all, if you just did it once and you change, then it's not a big deal. But if you have for 5 or 10 years scam people lying all of the times, I say it's a great thing to have it on a record. Other people should know it, because guess what? It's much more likely that you're gonna scam them again and let them know, we don't care, you deserve for people to know. And again, about losing control over your life up to the point where you're harming other people for your advantage by being scammed, by lying people, by hurting them. We don't believe that it's your freedom or anything and control of your life. You don't have the right to do all those things. It's extremely bad. Okay, so what do we tell you and why it's extremely important? We tell you that it's just justified to punish those people and to say you did these bad things, you're guilty for this. Djordje already explained you how horrific it is and what harms it brings. What I want to tell you is why it's completely justified to punish you. First of all, notice that in the motion, repeatedly doing something means that you actually you must see what you do. When you did once back to something, you may not know what you did, but you're constantly doing bad things. You see what harm you bring. You see that other people are sad. You see that you scammed them. You see what you did and what problems they are, and you're repeating this. You're continuing to doing this. Up to this point, we think that it's extremely moral to do this, that you are to be punished for this. Why it is we as a society value you not doing bad things to others. We as a society value and think that you should be punished for everything that you consciously do and do bad to others. This is to say that if you do something bad, you deserve to be punished because you did some harm to others. Therefore, it is coming back, but also giving the right to those who get who were hurt to actually get something back. Okay, we hear from CEO that we have to prove that it is good for those people. I don't think it is, because if it's just, it's enough, but it is good for those people. Why it is good for those people? Because when you're hurt, when someone has cheated you for how many years and you just realize it, you want something to happen. You want them to be accountable. You want them to you want to get some closure, up to the point when you see them being punished for something, for that much things that you happen, you actually feel satisfaction. It's not going to solve your problems. It's not the best thing, but you feel some closure. You feel better. You feel that your feelings and your hurts can be recognized as someone is being punished for that. POI from opening opposition.
Why is everything that can bring harms immediately a crime? Will you also criminalize sleeping in class if it's disrespectful to the teacher and does some harm?
No, first of all, if it's disrespectful, it's immoral to some point, but fine for that is going to be a warning. You're not going to go to prison for being disrespectful. We don't care about this. If you're constantly disrespectful for someone, you're probably a little bit immoral. You shouldn't make someone feel unhappy, but the punishment from this is extremely low. What we tell you is that constantly doing something and being aware is bad. Also notice that because there is an accurate way, everything that's completely, up to the discussion for other societies, we don't think it's in a debate. Accurately means that it's extremely clear that something is immoral. Only those things are in a debate. So how do we weigh against our opponent? First of all, I think it's highly contingent on those kind of things. Is it utilitarian or not, which is being challenged? Second of all, it also has challenges how much is going to solve and what is already being solving. But secondly, we think that at the end of the day, bringing just closures and bringing justice is far more important than all of those things, because justice in itself the most moral thing, and their good things are It's that. Thank you.
Right, great. I would like to thank the government for their speech. I would like to invite the opposition whip to wrap up the debate. Here.
I imagine if George was audible, I'm also audible.
You are.
Okay, great. Panel. Like, we love having objective metrics in debate, but this is kind of wacky. Utilitarianism is an insanely bad metric for opening government work, and it also affects closing government for multiple of reasons. You're not sure what is utilitarianly good or bad. If I murder someone, it provides a positive for another 10 people. Maybe it is utilitarianly good. Maybe it is utilitarianly bad because I murdered someone, and for it is not sure. It is not certain if negative harms that are done in the future for the action you did are also bad. For example, if I pollute in order to generate more income for my family, which provides positive consequences right now, but actually affects the environment in a bad way in the future, it is uncertain whether that will be a good action or a bad action. But thirdly, people do not have an immediate access, like by the model of OG, don't even have an immediate access to that morality. They have to question it from the government and take it like a health record. But fourthly, the problem is that even if all of this is the case, morality in how people perceive it is not based on that utility. Therefore, even in the best case for government, people have to force their own morality, circumvent it to fit a very narrow perspective of what morality is that forces guilt, that forces mental torture, as George told you, and we will further expand the impact. Okay. Why is all of this important debate? Two reasons. One, people cannot monitor them if it is uncertain on what the metric of such thing is, cannot monitor their behavior and change it. This is important because it means that they do not change their actions because they cannot predict their actions in that specific way. This means that the person who is being rude, like, sure, might think that is rude, but people are not bad anyway. So people monitor themselves anyway to stop being rude. This debate is mostly about bigger actions or different actions that you want to stop, which government doesn't stop because you don't know what they are. But secondly, it forces people to stay away from other people to minimize the certainty of them having bad actions because they do not want to be complicit in bad actions of others, which is an insane burden that we fulfilled in CEO and didn't get any response. What is the case we bring in CEO? Two things. One, people get mentally tortured because they feel constantly guilty for actions they've done in the past that they cannot fix because utility is a very non-objective metric that they cannot calculate. This means that most everyone in society is paranoid and is constant search of it. Or since he wants to call deterrence, we call it torture. But secondly, this is disproportionate punishment because panel says criminals are getting punished anyway. But I want to take the biggest burden. Rude people are getting punished anyway because nobody wants to be around rude people. I'm not sure why the punishment for rudeness should not be social isolation and should be like, I don't know, criminalization and fines, which is a burden that open opposition of both government things didn't fulfill. Okay, going to open government. You say you catch a criminal because you know of the moral record. Three problems. George already pointed this out. You do not know the actions, you know the morality. Therefore, my calculator is I have 100% immorality, but it's not because I killed someone or because of that. Else the state will be a big brother state, which is not the fiat of the motion. Secondly, even if that is the case, we tell you that the big part of capacity for you doing this is massively decreased to the point you're much more likely to search in multiple different directions on who is a criminal or not, because many people will have immoral actions that are not necessarily crimes, which means that the police and the resources of the police have to be spread around a lot of people, which mitigates a lot of the efficiency. But also we're going to flip this. You force convict people because of the high immorality record. This means maybe a person did not murder someone, but was rude for 20 years. In court, it is much more likely that a jury or like a person or a judge find this convincing enough for them to be convicted for murder, which is insanely disproportional and fucks up justice in its entirety. Then they say, you self-police. We already tackled this by the frame we gave you on why utility is an incredibly bad metric, but also two more things. One, people are not bad because they want to be bad. If a person knows their actions are immoral, they're likely to stop them and prevent them in the first place. People in the status quo, knowing that being rude is bad, know that cheating is bad, and therefore are not actively doing so because they're bad people. They have reasons, or they're being forced to do so. This is white lies or cheating because your relationship is going terribly. I don't know. I'm not gonna justify cheating. Okay, but we're also gonna flip this. This is terribly bad because you do not have rehabilitation for these actors. This is what our case was. The point that you socially isolate from other people because your parameters for who is guilty or not go to paranoid levels in order for you not to be falsely convicted of being immoral. It means at that point, people that are being immoral are like isolated from the rest of the society more than they're being in the status quo. Therefore, do not have an active way to climb back the immorality rather in order for them to become better people. This means that the rude people are 10 times more rude than the government because there is nobody to stop them from being so. The way for open government is this. One, numbers, we affect everyone. Everybody feels guilty and paranoid of their actions in order to protect them. This is immense impact because feelings are an immense impact. It is literally the pain and pleasure you feel in your daily life. It is through your feelings. If you have a constant feeling of guilt in your stomach that you cannot relieve because there is an objective metric that said that an action that you couldn't possibly calculate did a bad mistake, that's an impact that you feel constantly. But also the proportionality factor takes away criminality. Also, lastly, I'll take a POI from open government. Yeah.
Why is being a bit anxious and slightly less than free in a world you didn't prove is free more meaningful than better working conditions for millions or the millions of victims of domestic abuse whose abusers are literally never caught in the
Okay, you're trying to take CG. Okay, yes, CG is like part of OG, we agree. But also, why CG doesn't work? For reasons. One, reparations for mental abuse is not this because one, it is not necessarily part of utility. Maybe like, I don't know, there is a very fucked up scenario where people abuse people and that maximize utility. But on the second part is like, guys, I'm not sure why this is the tipping point for a victim to feel better. If like many times victims feel like their abuser is a good person or like they don't know they're being abused in the first place. But on a third matter, you're not going to take that abuse away. People have been abused and their abuse they felt is immense. The tipping point of intensity that they have is extremely small because sure, that person might get fined, that person might go to prison. You're also not sure whether they go to prison because of your abuse. Maybe they went there for something else that you don't know. Therefore, they've never proven why these victims feel enough. But also we beat them on the numbers because there are way less people that are getting abused. And our case applies to simply every person in humanity that has done a mistake, which is most people. And also intensity, which is literally mental torture. Lastly, on OO ran a case that is not compatible with the debate. They said most of the case is about thoughts and actions of minorities. I think it was taken down. But lastly, on the morality of it, never impacted. The morality matters so long as people are affected of it directly by mental torture. We co-opt OO case and beat them. Vote CO.